maybe before Joe starts, is there a particular interest in these resurrection appearances that helped you kind of want to be more curious about them? Or not? Or not?
I particularly love the story of the walk to Emmaus. I'm not sure I have any particular question, but I think it is something I think about from time to time. It's a very powerful passage.
Okay, thank you.
We're among friends, so it's okay.
I've always been, I don't know whether I'd say puzzled or about doubting Thomas. I mean, I've known about him for years and years and years, but why he couldn't even trust his friends, the disciples who said they had seen him. Why did he have to touch the wounds himself? But then suddenly after that, be a fervent believer and right on board, and like it's like he's come in with full force. Why?
Yeah, but his friends had already seen him and seen his wounds, and so they saw it. They probably would have had doubts if they hadn't seen it. And when Mary met him, all she needed was him to say her name, and she believed. Whereas the apostles that she told had to go and check it out for themselves. So I think he was not the only doubter. I think there were lots of doubters, except for the women, of course,
Well, he wanted scientific evidence.
Yeah.
He wanted evidence for himself. Can't blame him.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe so.
There's nothing wrong with doubting. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
we're sort of, I think, in a constant sort of fluctuation between total belief and commitment and, skepticism and wondering. Many times in our lives, certainly for me, I couldn't say, oh, that's the moment I first believed and that was it forever and ever. I mean, that would be kind of deadening.
Mm-hmm. And Chris, I remember saying once that they don't name his twin because we're all the twin. Thomas.
I guess the way it's written, it's just he suddenly went from really doubting to a very strong disciple. And wasn't it Thomas that went on? No, maybe it was John. One of them, I thought it was Thomas, that went on to say, I want to be on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of Christ. It wasn't Thomas. Okay.
No, it was the Thunder Boys, but that's another old story.
Oh,
okay. Yeah. Sit on the right hand and the chief chair sitters, we call them. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's a good start, because I think that at least Joe's section this week and mine next week are about why we needed to add to the stories and why the story continues or how it continues. And over to you, Joe.
Okay. Well, yeah. So we're talking about the resurrection, and it's very helpful to hear Eleanor and Patricia and Elizabeth and everyone, talk about their thoughts about resurrection and about the resurrection experiences or appearances. I, for one, have for a long time, I won't say forever, but for a long time, have been very taken by the post-resurrection experiences of Jesus, because, the first time anybody sees the resurrected Jesus, they say, who are you? What's going on? I can't believe my eyes. Who is this? And you're right. I mean, Jesus becomes known to them in various ways, either by calling Mary Magdalene's name or by breaking bread with them, or something, or eating fish on the beach, like we'll hear about next week. And so there are all sorts of ways that this can happen, but and so Linda told me when we started this thought, so I'll just say this, said, now, you're limited to one poem and one piece of art. Well, that's not what you're going to get exactly, but I tried really hard to do that. So we're going to have two poems, and one of them is a poem that's really quite difficult. It is for me anyway, which I'll reveal to you in a moment, not to be coy, but and then another, which talks about Jesus' resurrection and the effect of it. But the other one is about another aspect of resurrection, and that is our resurrection, the resurrection as it applies to us. And so we're going to talk about both of those kinds of things. But first, the passage that really came to me to start with is the ending of the Gospel of Mark. And the reason it came to my mind is because nobody really knows how the gospel ends. There are two, well, actually three, but really two basic ways that the Gospel of Mark can end. And we're going to look at those. And when I say there are two ways it could be, it's not like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. If you remember those books, my daughters, which dates me from 35 or 40 years ago, used to have these choose your adventure books. And so you could always turn the page and see where you're going to end up. Well, the Gospel of Mark is not exactly like that, but there is one ending, and then that's the ending that appears in all the earliest manuscripts that are available of the Gospel of Mark. And the earliest manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark really don't start showing up until the end of the 2nd century. There was a big fuss a couple of years ago where somebody had found a Gospel of Mark copy that dated, they said, to the year 145. Unfortunately, nobody really knows if that's the right date or the right piece, and it doesn't have anything to do with the end of the gospel anyway. So we're still left in mystery as to what the end is. So what I'm going to do is I will apologize to you in advance. I shouldn't do that. Linda is so much more visual than I am. But as many of you know, I'm a lawyer by trade, and so words are kind of what I trade in. And so there's a lot of words on this on my little PowerPoint. But I'm going to share the screen, I hope, and see if I can find it. Well, maybe. I tell you what, I'm not going to worry about sharing the screen right now. You would think that I would know how to do this by now, but anyways, let me just read to you. And if you have your Bibles, you can, I know that sounds very Baptist. I grew up as a Baptist, so, if you get your Bibles out, but we're Episcopalians, so you have your Bibles too, I know. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at the last chapter of the Gospel of Mark. That's Mark 16. And if anybody would like to read, because you're going to get tired of hearing from me, but if anybody would like to read the first 8 verses of the 16th chapter of Mark, I would love to hear from you. Yeah, thank you, Meryl.
Okay, first of all, I have to find it.
Okay.
Mark 16. Whoops, oh, sorry. Okay, Mark 16, how many verses?
The first 8.
First 8, okay. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Thank you. Now, in the copies that y'all have, what is there any marker or any distinction about what happens at that point? Is there something in the text? What, Patricia, what does your text?
Well, below verse 8, it says the shorter ending of Mark, and then within parentheses, there is a further verse.
Would you read that
And
for
then
us?
below
Yeah.
that, there's some additional verses.
Right. Would you read the shorter verse for us? Or the one that's right after the shorter ending of Mark?
Shall I do that? Yeah.
Please, yes.
And all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterwards, Jesus himself went out through them from east to west, the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation.
Okay.
Went out through them, sorry.
Yeah. So thank you. So so actually the verse that Patricia just read is also not in the original manuscripts, but there's apparently, and I'm not a manuscript scholar by any means, but I've seen a little bit of them, and I'm sure some of you have seen some of these things, but the earliest manuscripts usually end at the end of chapter 8, where Merrill finished reading. There is another set that's a little bit later that has the verse that Patricia just read. And then after that, we're going to read that in just a second. After that, there is the so-called long, and I don't mean to be cavalier about this, but the so-called longer ending of Mark, because this is the set of verses that routinely appears in later manuscripts of the gospel. So, and I've looked it up to try to find out when did it start appearing, and I'm not so sure, but it didn't start appearing until the end of the 2nd century. So, I mean, over 100 years after the Gospel of Mark was written were these manuscript copies that include the so-called longer ending of Mark. So right now, if you will, if somebody would like to read verses 9 through the end of the chapter, I would appreciate that. We'd all love to hear about that.
Sure, I can do it.
Please.
Okay. Now, after he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went out and told those who had been with him while they were mourning and weeping. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it. After this, he appeared to another form to 2 of them, and as they were walking into the country, and they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. Later, he appeared to the 11 themselves, as they were sitting at the table, and he upbraided them for their lack of faith and stubbornness, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. And he said to them, "Go into all the world and proclaim the good news to the whole creation. The one who believes and is baptized will be saved, but the one who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. By using my name, they will cast out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes in their hands. and if they drink any deadly thing, it will not hurt them, and they will lay their hands on the sick, and they will recover. So then the Lord Jesus, after he had spoken to them, was taken up into heaven and sat at the right hand of God. And they went out and proclaimed the good news everywhere, while the Lord worked with them and confirmed the message by the signs that accompanied it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So we have two alternative endings. Linda and Patricia could probably tell, and others of you perhaps could tell more about this, but I will just tell you that in all the reading that I have done, and I read a fair amount about this kind of stuff, I have seen theologians and writers who say, well, it's pretty clear Mark, or whoever the writer of this gospel was, intended to stop at the end of verse 8. And there are others who say, well, that doesn't make any sense. You don't even know where Jesus is at that point. I mean, you get, the message from some guy who's sitting in the empty tomb saying, he's not here. He is risen. Go to Galilee and tell the others, about him. And the women, who are notable for their, valor and bravery and so forth in going to the tomb in the first place, are said to be terrified. They're filled with terror and amazement. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's the end. I mean, that's the end of the gospel. So, which I guess I have a lot of questions about this, and I don't know whether any of these really resonate with y'all, but I guess my first question is, well, why do you think the gospel plausibly ends at the end of verse 8? The other gospels don't do that. Matthew, Luke, and John do not. Y'all know that. So, but Mark ends perhaps there. Why do you think that? Why would the writer purposely end his gospel with the women in terror and not able to say anything?
Well, I'm thinking, this is Debbie.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that the longer and the shorter ending were not written by Mark. And so Mark might not have, whoever wrote Mark, may not have lived long enough to write the other endings, and someone else added them in, who was
Okay.
one of his disciples.
Okay, that's an interesting theory. So thank you for that. So if you go to the end of chapter 15, then the last couple of verses are, Joseph of Arimathea, goes to take the crucified Christ down from the cross, and he takes him to a tomb that had been hewn out of the rock, and he rolls a stone against the door, and Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, saw where the body was laid. Mark makes a big point to say the women saw that he had been put in the tomb. That's the end of chapter 15. So maybe Mark ended it there, or whoever. So, or who knows? Any other thoughts?
Well, the longer version, is quite judgmental. I mean, it's basically saying anybody who doesn't believe in me, they're doomed. And which is interesting considering how many of the disciples didn't believe. So it seemed odd to me that he would say to all of these disciples who didn't believe, now you believe, you go and tell all these other people, and if they don't believe, then they're in big trouble. even though the disciples, none of them believed in the first place. So I found that very odd that he would condemn all these other people for not believing when the disciples didn't believe at first. So
Yeah.
maybe that wasn't put in there because it seemed contradictory to what Christ's message had been all along. Like, and I never thought of Christ as being somebody who would condemn people who hadn't caught on yet. Like, he was all about trying to teach people, and if they didn't get it, then he would try again. So this seemed like an odd message for him to pass on to his disciples.
Okay. So your point would be that the longer ending just doesn't ring true. It just
No.
doesn't sound right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And what
Others?
about all that snake handling? Like, had that become a thing, 30 years after the crucifixion? Where does that come from? I mean, we know where it persists occasionally today, but that's an odd bit. And you wonder if it's based on, what custom is it based on?
I love your thought about that. Linda is sick of hearing from me talking about snake handling and drinking poison and so forth. And you're right. That's something that you'd think me, being as a Southerner from the United States, would surely know about. I don't. I mean, none of the churches I grew up in did that kind of thing. But you're right. It does persist. In fact, I was going to put in some pictures of snake handling, but I said, that if I can only have one piece of art, I'm not going to put that on there. So, but no, I think you're right. And that's, to me, the question is, if the longer version was added, well, whether it was added by Mark or by the church later on, why did they pick these things, as being the signs of someone who believes?
Yes.
And I don't know. And I've looked into that as well. And Linda, I know I looked up every reference to snakes and serpents in the Bible. And there are some. There is a serpent in the Adam and Eve story. There is a snake in Moses, in the story of Moses. There are a few snakes in Isaiah, but they're really not really terribly interesting. So it's really the Eve story and the Moses story that I think are the case. And I thought about the snakes because I said that just kind of captures my attention, just like the condemnation talks to Helen, speaks to Helen and says that doesn't sound right. So to me, I'm thinking that one could look at that as a metaphor for temptations in the wilderness, or the need for radical trust in God. Because if Jesus told you to handle snakes and everything would be good, well, maybe he didn't really mean for you to do that, but he really meant for you to have, absolute total trust in him. That would be consistent. But to phrase it simply as,
Do we have to have
way,
trust in the people that saw him?
Yeah.
I think many of us, like, for example, I worked in psychiatry, and there's a lot of religious ideation among especially schizophrenics. And I can't tell you how many patients have come up and said, oh, the Lord appeared to me. And I'm not going to say, no, he didn't, or I'm going to say, well, tell me about it, and you expand on it. But would you believe, I know this is a sick mind, but would you believe anybody? I wouldn't, unless I'd seen it myself. Something as profound as that. If somebody said, the neighbor up the street, has dyed their hair purple, I might believe that without seeing it. But this is a profound happening. And the other thing that gets me in this thing is the speaking in tongues, because the only time I've heard that is in an evangelical church. And I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't understand anyway, but people were talking back and forth. And
actually, the speaking in tongues, just to say, that's something that's referenced by Paul in a contemporary type letter, as being one of the gifts of the Spirit, or one of the manifestations of the Spirit. So that I can understand. But even Paul, for all the things he talks about, I don't think he talks about snake handling and drinking poison and stuff like that. The other things, yes. I mean, healing people, speaking in tongues, and even casting out demons. I mean, Jesus did that, at least according to the scripture. So, it's just an interesting list. And like Patricia, I'm just wondering, was that something that was going on then? I don't know. The only other thing that I can think of culturally is that I know snake charming is something that from time to time is practiced in India, and maybe in other Asian societies. I don't know. So it may be that that's something that was actually. I'm thinking that whoever wrote this, it wasn't such a stretch that they were thinking, oh, I'm just going to make something that sounds totally bizarre up. I mean, I would think that it's something that was within their experience. I mean, that just makes sense to me.
Could have been metaphorical as well, because when they were Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden, they were told that they would be enemies with snakes because of what had happened. And so if Christ was coming to rectify the earlier original sin from the Garden of Eden, then maybe this has something to do with that reconciliation of man and God. And I don't know, it could be why it was put in there. Not that I really like the idea of thinking about snakes in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I have something in my Bible, okay, in the notes, that says that the longer ending and the shorter ending, the shorter ending was added in the 7th to 9th century, and the longer ending was added after the 1st century. And it says that it was added by Council of Trent, and that it was not written by Mark, and that it was found in some of the other, there's more than these 4 gospels. Okay. They all of the disciples wrote something. And in some of the other ones, this part of it was in those, and they felt that part of Mark's had been lost. And so they added this back in, the Council of Trent did.
I think that actually the serpents and the poison, they're really quite traditional tests of truth in a lot of societies. It's kind of like witchcraft, if you sink or if you survive, you're definitely a witch. If you sink and drown, no, you weren't. So I think it was a test, a kind of test that many societies did use.
And Dorian, like I say, that makes a certain amount of sense to me, because I find it hard to believe that the church or whoever wrote this longer ending would have just made up out of whole cloth, these tests as tests of a believer, because that's what they are. I mean, they're signs that someone is a believer.
And also, to go along with what Helen said, that Jesus was described as the new Adam.
Right.
So there's a sense in which a theological, some of the doctrinal statements about, not just about atonement and blood sacrifice and about, necessary sacrifice and all of those things. And also, well, if you're not doing that, then let's go to the beginning.
Mhm.
Since Christ was the new beginning, then this was the new Adam. And you'll hear that elsewhere in texts. But I'm more intrigued by the early ending because I don't really think it ends. Are you going to go back to that?
I am. I definitely
Okay.
am.
Okay.
Let
I
me-
won't say anymore.
Let me throw out a bit of history for you, just to see if this resonates. Probably the Gospel of Mark is generally considered to have been written around the time between 66 and 74, somewhere along in there. Probably, although not sure, but it's probably the first of the Gospels that was written down. And so keep in mind the date 66 through 74. The Roman emperor who was in place just before that was Nero. And Nero usually has a reputation as being an absolute maniac. He actually started out as a fairly reasonable guy for a Roman emperor. And then somehow or another, probably went mad or something. I mean, but in any event, the city of Rome burned, either because he torched it because he wanted to build a new Rome, or because he had to blame it on somebody, and so he blamed it on the Christians. And we know about this because one of the early Roman historians, a fellow named Tacitus, tells the story this way. And this is his description of what happened. But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the order of Nero, that is. So consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. This is one of the very first references to Christians as being Christians. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty of being Christians. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much of the crime of firing the city, as of hatred of mankind. And he goes on to say, they abstained from most social activities, since these were so connected with pagan worship. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt, to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. It was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. All right, that's what happens right after the year 64 as a result of the fire of the Rome burning. Nero blamed the Christians and put them to, as they say, exquisite tortures. So the Gospel of Mark was written right after that. And you can imagine, or I can imagine anyway, that this whole incident, this whole range of activities was very much on the mind of Christians, the Christians who were surviving. And it may well have been that the Christians who were surviving were the ones who survived because they really weren't willing to stand up and admit that they were Christians, because otherwise they would have been put to the torch, at least in Rome. Now, that's not everywhere. This didn't happen everywhere. It was in Rome. But still, to be a Christian at that point was rather dangerous. And so there are some many anyway, who say, well, given the circumstances of what was going on historically with the Roman Empire and so forth, Mark's ending, the shorter ending, really makes a lot of sense, because you have an empty tomb. You have a man who's sitting in the empty tomb on Easter saying, Jesus, he has been raised. He's not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told them. So, but the women who went to the tomb were terrified and amazed. And perhaps, a plausible explanation that has been put forth, at least by some, is that, well, Mark's gospel was really intended to speak to the people who are reading this only a very few years after, the first big Christian persecution in Rome. And it tells the people of who are Christians, don't you feel this way? Don't you feel kind of terrified, amazed, and, and wondering about what you should be? But look, the guy in the tomb has told you Jesus has risen. This really happened. You can go find him. I don't know. That just strikes me as being sort of sensible. What do you think?
I think it's helpful to us I find it helpful to end up amazed and afraid, because I think we sometimes come to faith in a sort of blinding insight or something, and sometimes we come to it more gradually and with more struggle and that sort of thing. And sort of comforting to me that everybody didn't sort of automatically come to a firm belief. But for me, I think belief is a kind of a ongoing thing, and a kind of trusting sometimes when we're afraid and not sure of the answer.
Thanks. Yeah. Thank you. Any others? Any other thoughts?
I think it's not only trusting, I think it's also questioning as well. As Patricia says, it's sort of an ongoing thing. So you might trust it at some point and not at others. I mean, I'm at the moment having a really hard time with the whole concept of death and resurrection for reasons that a lot of people know. But it's a constantly evolving notion, I think.
And so it would not be any more satisfying for you in this faith journey if somebody gave you a pat answer.
I
No,
think
That's right.
that's right.
That's right.
Because sometimes you're very sure, and sometimes you step back and you're challenged and you're not sure at all, and you feel a little lost, and you have to search again. I think it's helpful.
Mhm. For me, because the Gospel of Mark begins on the margins, begins in Galilee, I really like the fact that it ends, and in essence ends there. But it doesn't end there, as much as the beginning of the Gospel of Mark was a beginning. When the figure says, you will see him in Galilee, well, that's the next chapter of the experiences or the encounters, and we'll hear in the other Gospels that if everything were written, there wouldn't be enough pages, right, to fill
Right.
the experiences of so many. I think, and I agree with Joe, that context matters enormously. That how this was heard in a particular time and place in historical context is one thing, and also how it lands on us personally in a particular context. So if we're dealing with grief and loss and fear and terror, how would this land? How would this land in the refugees? With those who are fleeing because of hunger or wildfires or whatever. How does this, is that always the end of the story? It really isn't the end of the story. So I'm with Joe. I really prefer that it end where it originally ended, and the kind of the telos is open.
Well, I agree too. That this particular gospel was written to Gentiles. It's the only gospel that's written to the others were all by Jewish men. So this one was written for the Gentiles. And so it was like Joe was saying that what was going on at the time of Nero and the rulers and everything. And they were wanting the Gentiles to understand that faith was stronger than the snakes and the strong drinks and that type of thing. And they were wanting them to build their faith based on what they were being told about Christ. And it's hard, like someone was saying, it's hard to believe when someone just tells you, like, yeah, really, And so this is where it was coming from. They were reading these in their little services and they were going, okay, this is what happened. And we have to believe because we weren't there. We didn't see it. We weren't of those disciples. And so it was one for the Gentiles. And it's an important one. And it doesn't end. The shorter ending kind of tells them it goes into eternal salvation. That there is that it keeps going.
Well, the short version ends with women fleeing. And then the added part, I think he appear to Mary Magdalene, and she goes and tells the crew, and they don't believe her. They don't
Now
believe.
that's in the regular part. The shorter ending.
No,
is
in the
just that
longer
one
ending.
paragraph.
I'm just saying maybe they're adding it on because women aren't very credible, weren't credible witnesses back in the day.
That could be too, yeah.
So they had to get the men in there before they believed,
Yeah, Debbie,
It's a feminist thing.
Yeah, one thing I would comment to Debbie about just is that the verse that you're talking about that ends with the proclamation of eternal salvation, that is in some manuscripts, but it's not in the earliest ones. So we really don't know where that came from. I mean, we just don't.
Yeah, and that's what I told you, what was in my notes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That it was added, the shorter ending was added in the 7th and 8th century, and that it probably came from other manuscripts that had been passed along. The church, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church has manuscripts that we've never seen that are in their libraries. I mean, it's from other disciples that have written all these different manuscripts that we've never got the chance. I would love to be someone to go in and be able to see all those. I'm a historian by degree and an archaeologist. And so I would love to be able to read those, but they don't make it available.
Okay. Well, in any event, but you've got the shorter version And then you got the longer version. One of the things, and Elizabeth's already started talking about, one of the things with the beginning of the longer version is that somehow or another, the women were at the tomb in the shorter version, which still is there. And then all of a sudden, Mary Magdalene, meets Jesus. And that's not inconsistent with some of the other gospels, but it also is a kind of a rough transition from, well, she's in the tomb, and then all of a sudden, here's Jesus meeting her, someplace else. But the point probably is, among the points is, nobody believed her when she went to actually tell people about this. But then read the next thing. The next thing, Patricia's already talked about the walk to Emmaus. Well, this may be, a version that talks about the same kind of thing, albeit in much shorter fashion, because here it says, after this, Jesus appeared in another form to two of them as they were walking into the country. Well, that would be very, it doesn't say that was the walk to Emmaus, but that's part of the tradition. And it may well be. And, to describe Jesus as appearing in another form and then still and walking with him, it doesn't say how it was that they finally figured out who he was, but they figured it out. They went back and told the rest, and they didn't believe them either, even though there were a couple of guys. Really, it's kind of insulting. So, so you've got Mary Magdalene and then these two disciples who are come back from the country, and they go and tell the disciples, and nobody believes them until finally he appeared to the 11 and gives his final, words to them. And then he ascends. I have to confess, I'd forgotten that he ascended in the Mark Gospel, but then I guess I hadn't paid that much attention to the long version anyway. So anyway, that's just, Patricia.
I'm interested in the fact that the young man tells them to go back to Galilee, and he's saying to them, go home.
Mm-hmm.
Go where you were brought up. And so one of the sort of aspects of aging that I have been aware of in myself is that you do, as you get older, I think, begin to kind of look back at your early life, to look at, what were my parents thinking then? Or how did this come about? Or why is it that we ended up here, or whatever? Like, I think I have found in my own experience a kind of re-examining of going back home. And in effect, I think most of the homes I ever lived in are no longer standing, so I couldn't go back literally. But I find it quite interesting that the young man says to them, go home. Don't stay here in Jerusalem, go home. And maybe that is where they will find out who Jesus is and what that meant and so on. That may be off the wall, but that's just what comes to my mind.
Well, I think it can be heard metaphorically as well.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to the place where you
Yes.
you're at home.
Yes.
With God. Go back to the memories
Yes.
of your time and your encounters with Jesus. And that will stay. And what they begin to find is that that's a living memory. That's not a dead memory at all. It's not a piece
And then
of,
2 or 3 others are moved by what Mark has done to begin to write their own accounts.
Yeah.
Matthew and Luke, and then eventually John. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm with Linda. Patricia, I really like that notion, of going home to find. And I really think that for so many of us, there are times when, as a Christian, there are big things I would love to be able to do. But the truth is that what I really need to do is to be a disciple where I am, to go home and be a disciple, to I don't need to do something big and fancy. And I know that's not exactly the point you were making, but I like what you're saying. I totally think that's right. Others, any other thoughts?
I think that is the point, though.
Mhm.
I think that is the point, that you start from your comfort zone, which is probably home, however you define it. I think that's a very, very good way of thinking about it for us who are so distant from the actual events. I think
Mhm.
that's an anchor point.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Joe, when you were talking about when this was written,
Hmm.
I was just thinking at the time, wouldn't most of the people who were identifying as Christians have been illiterate? So would they be getting this from written words, or would they be getting it from stories being told, like word of mouth more?
Well, I'm probably treading on dangerous ground, but it's, I mean, the gospel. Let's assume that Jesus died and was raised somewhere around the year 30, 32, 33, somewhere in there. And the earliest of the gospels, the Mark gospel, is usually thought, and again, this is not absolutely totally for certain, but it is usually thought to be the first one, and it's usually thought to have been written in around 66 to 74. So that's 36, 40, 45 years later. Well, I don't know about y'all, your memory may be a lot better than mine, but if you were to ask me what I was doing in detail and what the exact conversation was I had with somebody, even if it was important, like for my father or my mother or something like that, 45 years ago, I might be able to give you the gist of it. I probably would, but that'd be it. I mean, and even that, Patricia, I don't know about you, but I mean, what I remember and what the absolute truth of something is that happened 45 years ago,
Yeah.
and how I remember it, they will bear some relationship to each other, but they may not be exactly the same.
My sister has very different accounts of some childhood events. She and I were there at the very same events, but her memory and what she remembers somebody saying or doing is different from mine. And those of you who have siblings will probably know that too. That part of the very same event, different things strike us.
More than one narrative, but I want to get back to Helen's question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because there was written language, Helen. The early gospel was in Koine Greek, but I mean, the synagogue had scrolls, and there were literate people in a variety of manuscripts. And when we found the Qumran scrolls in the desert that were in the jars, it's not like having a newspaper, however, right? And it's not like writing a text or, on a social media platform where lots of people can read it at the same time. So you're right in terms of transmission. The transmission was complicated, but we can't assume that it was only oral tradition.
Mhm.
There were some, and then there were some narratives that were written to be more permanent, to be
So-
more of a touchstone, right?
So things would have been written down about Jesus before the gospel was written, and that was used in order to write the gospel, like these snippets from different places.
Well, the Pauline letters are earlier than the Gospels.
Right. Mm-hmm.
For example, we dating some of this is complicated, but in other places we do know that the letters of Paul, which were written and hand delivered and so on, were earlier than the Gospels.
And the addition that from verse 9 on in Mark, that was written later by who? By somebody that wanted to either embellish it or
Well, the
put more
note said
truth
that
in, or put more truth in. And so I don't know. I
Well, the
think
note,
like trying to remember things as Patricia was saying, you know, sometimes they're embellished, sometimes things are shaved away. So
yeah, the notes and the concordance and everything for my Bible say that it was introduced by the Council of Trent by using other manuscripts.
okay.
And it's thought that Mark was actually John Mark, who was with Paul and Barnabas during his travels. And so he would have been probably the scribe part of the group, being so close to Paul. And
That's one perspective, Debbie, from
Yeah.
one set of scholars.
yeah, that's one side of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you need to know. I mean, people need to know.
Oh, I
that
know.
there-
I've done all the studies on this.
I know you have, but when you say, you know, this is blah, 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 there are also other scholars who have other opinions.
Yeah, I just said that they thought it might be. I didn't say
Okay.
that it was.
Okay,
I just said that they thought it would be.
okay.
Can I just ask a question? Because I was reading and it was a fairly recent analysis, I guess, and they were saying that carbon dating suggested that Philip's gospel was the first one. And it was maybe 48, something like that. I don't know if anybody else had read that. It was
Didn't
really
see
when
that,
I
but
was reading.
the Thomas gospel, which is
Thomas,
all the
sorry.
sayings.
Yes,
Yes, it's the sayings gospel, and there's no
Yeah.
narrative
yeah.
in that. It's just Jesus said, and then Jesus said, and then Jesus said, and Jesus said, Jesus said. So,
Well, it was
um,
when I was doing when I still do my searching for Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, I have been too. I can't find Mary Magdalene's gospel, and they say there's one out there.
Well,
Yes.
there's 19 pages that you can read, but that's about all.
Gospel of Mary, Karen King at Harvard.
Yeah.
Translated that.
Yeah.
Now,
Did you get to share screen yet? With
no.
I want the poem and I want the art.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
yeah,
what I was waiting on.
I do want to read, there are two poems, and I'm probably not going to be able to share the art with you, and I apologize for that.
Send it along.
I'll send it along. You'd think I could do better in life, but oh well.
Or can't you email it to someone else who could share screen?
Yes. Well,
Well, yeah, I probably could do that. Yeah,
I
I could
have-
do it.
I should have it.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you want to Linda, if you want to look for it, or if you've got it, that'd be great. But
Well,
I think
I
I
mean-
can actually read, well, the art that I would be most interested in, because like, again, I only was supposed to get one, but I actually came up with two or three. But one of them is a Baroque piece by Carracci. It's in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. And it is a painting of the three women at the empty tomb. And it's a very Renaissance Baroque type version of that, which has some interesting things. And then there is also a late 19th century piece by Tissot that is not really the Markan version of the empty tomb, but it's a pretty good one anyway. I don't know, can you see it, Linda?
Linda, you're on mute.
Okay, I have it up. It's open, so let's see if we can't get it. Perspectives on the Resurrection. This is Joe's.
Yeah. Mhm.
And here we go, share. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, So where do you want to be, Joe?
Well, why don't you click on the enable editing up on the predicted view so you can do this as a slideshow if you want to. Yep.
Oh yeah, there. Okay. All right.
All
Now
right,
what?
and then you would just go down to, well, you can go down to slide 3.
Okay.
Slide 3 is, this is from a Psalter from the 12th century. This is obviously from a prayer book. And the tradition is the myrrh-bearing women. And many of you have already noted that it's the women who prepare Jesus' body for burial. It's the women who went to the tomb early in the morning. They were not supposed to be wandering around without accompaniment at that point in their lives. But they were brave women. And the 3 that are shown here are the ones that are from Mark. But actually, the Gospels, if you kind of add them all up and add all the names that the Gospels have, there are like 8 different myrrh-bearing women. There's all sorts of folks. But the 3 that are in Mark are, they're pretty regular. One is Mary Magdalene, one is Mary, the mother of James, and the other one is Salome. And so you see them. You see the halos around their heads, indicating that they are holy. You see the young man who's sitting on the right side of the tomb, or the empty tomb. Now, in the front, in the foreground, you see a bunch of soldiers who have collapsed and fallen asleep or whatever. That is not a feature that appears in Mark. You remember that when the women were going to the tomb, in the shorter version of the Gospel of Mark, they were asking, well, gosh, what are we going to do? Who's going to roll the stone away? And then lo and behold, they show up and it's gone. The stone is rolled away and here's who they see. But Jesus is not here. So let's look at the slide below that is the painting by Carracci, that one. This is by Carracci, and it's a little hard to see, but you can tell this is a very Baroque piece. A lot of movement, a lot of activity is going on. You see, though, the same thing that's going on here. You have the young man, and although he's not described in the gospel as an angel, well, he probably was, because he is described as having a white tunic, and that's associated with angels. I haven't seen one, so I don't know, but anyway, this is probably the angel, and he's letting them know, he's pointing to the empty tomb and saying, the guy you're looking for, Jesus, is not here. The 3 women, you can probably tell they're balanced in terms of their colors. Baroque painters used lots of very vivid colors. 2 of the women have their heads covered, the one on the most left and the one in the center. But the one on the right, you can probably figure out, well, who do you think that one is?
Mary Magdalene.
Absolutely, because she's in all red. She's got her hair uncovered. She's the one clutching the vase of spices. She's the one that's the one in charge. And, as the Gospel of Mark describes her in the longer version, she was one that Jesus had healed of 7, or had cast out 7 demons from her. Others, she has this undeserved reputation for being a prostitute, but she's never described in the Bible anyway as a prostitute. But somehow or another, she's gotten bad press. But she also is the one who is the most beautiful of the group, because if she's a prostitute, well, she must have been pretty good looking. So anyway, at least that was the notion of the Italian painters and so forth. So, and then this one is a little bit different. This is by Tissot. This is late 19th century French. Tissot made his living as a portrait painter. And he ended up marrying one of his favorite models. She died, and with about 15 years left in his life, he had a conversion to Roman Catholicism. And so when you see paintings by him, and Linda and I both are kind of fond of the guy, it's because, you know, he was very prolific in painting during the last 15 years of his life. And a lot of the paintings that he did are now collected in a wing at the Brooklyn Museum. So if you go to Brooklyn, the museum is good for other reasons as well, but this one, you're going to find a lot of paintings by Tissot at this one. But you'll see here just a whole heap of Roman soldiers that are collapsed in front of the tomb. Again, this is not a feature from Mark. You'll also see the women not nearly as fancily dressed in this painting as in the Carracci painting. And this is one of a series of two paintings. The other painting that goes along with this is by Tissot, and it's from a very similar time period because it's titled not Mary Magdalene and the Holy Women at the Tomb. It's called Resurrection. And what you see in that one is kind of an ethereal figure of Jesus in the front of the tomb. The women are kind of gone at that point, and Jesus appears, you know, in full body at that point. But there again is something different about Jesus. You wouldn't look at this painting and say, "Oh yeah, I'd have known that was Jesus," because it doesn't look like him. He's all in white. He's white. I mean, he's very, you know, pale. And he looks kind of like a ghost. He's floating around, and I don't know. It's but like I say, all the post-resurrection experiences, you know, have a feature of people saying, "Gosh, who is this?" You know, we don't recognize them until something happens.
Who do you think the two guys inside the door are?
A good question. They're not marked. Well,
Yeah, I know. There's two men though, because there's 4 feet.
Yep, that you're right. You're exactly right. Yeah, but
But they're white. They're in white.
They are, but they're not Jesus. They,
Right.
I think that this is another version of one of the other gospels, because in other gospels there can be more than one angel or more than one man who is sitting in the tomb telling people he's risen. You know, he's not here. Go look for him someplace else, or go to Galilee, or go home, or go to where Jesus told you he would meet you. So, Linda, any other thoughts? I know you're you're a fan of Tissot. You're muted.
No, just that he did a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and so his paintings really give you the sense that he was there.
Yeah.
And that there's some kind of more authenticity than imagining,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps.
Yes.
But your next one is a very interesting one as well.
I'm just going to leave that one up there. I mean, this is called Easter Morning. So, you know, the artist he's kind of like a grandma Moses, I think. He's self-taught. He took up painting late in life. He converted to Roman Catholicism as well. And so this is his take on Easter morning. And the only comment that I've ever read about this painting is somebody asked him, "What's the airplane doing up in the upper right-hand corner, or that upper corner?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. I just had some space to fill in, and it seemed like the right thing to put in there." So,
Well, and isn't that Jonah and the fish?
Yes.
Kind of looks like it to me.
So it's another, a different time period and a different frame of theological reference, but who was in the belly for 3 days before he was spit out. So
Oh yeah, okay.
right. So that's That's part of it. That appears in some other early writings, which also surprised me, but I had sort of forgotten about that. When people say there's no other reference in the Hebrew Testament about this kind of survival beyond death, and actually there is. So he put,
Yeah.
Okay, can we get to the poetry? Can I go to
Yes.
that?
Let's
Okay.
do that.
Okay.
So skip down the 7 and 8 are from the text. So go down to number 9, I think it is. No, let's go to number 10. We'll go to 10 first, because 10 really talks about a little bit different focus. One of my favorite poets is a guy named Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry grew up in Kentucky. He's still alive. He is associated with the Southern agrarian movement. He has written some of the best, most genuine novels that I've read about a fictional town called Port William in Kentucky. And if you really are looking for something really good to read, I would suggest pretty much any one of his novels. They're wonderful. But he's also a very good poet, or at least I think he's a very good poet. So, Linda, can we get somebody to read? Would you read, if you can read this, would one of you be willing to read this poem? This is called Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front. And you're going to say, what has this got to do with anything? I think you'll see, but I'm interested in your thoughts. Would anybody like to read this for us?
I can.
Thank you.
Love the quick profit, the annual raise, vacation with pay. Want more of everything ready-made. Be afraid to know your neighbors and to die. And you will have a window in your head. Not even your future will be a mystery anymore. Your mind will be punched in a card and shut away in a little drawer. When they want you to buy something, they will call you. When they want you to die for profit, they will let you know. So friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world, work for nothing. Take all that you have and be poor. Love someone who does not deserve it. Denounce the government and embrace the flag. Hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. Give your approval to all you cannot understand. Praise ignorance, for what man has not encountered, he is not destroyed. Ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you did not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they are rotted into the mold. Call that profit. Prophesy such returns. Put your faith in 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 years. Listen to the carrion, put your ear close and hear the faint clattering of the songs that are to come. Expect the end of the world. Laugh. Laughter is immeasurable. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. So long as women do not go cheap for power, please women more than men. Ask yourself, will this satisfy a woman satisfied to bear a child? Will this disturb the sleep of a woman near to giving birth? Go with your love to the fields, lie down in the shade, rest your head in her lap. Swear allegiance to what is nighest your thoughts. As soon as the generals and the politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Leave it as a sign to mark the false trail, the way you didn't go. Be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection.
Thank you, Helen. Well, you may say, well, that's an awful long poem to get to the last line. But I wonder what you think too. I mean, I can tell you what I think. I'm more interested in what y'all have to say. I hope that didn't waste your time, but
No, you didn't. Not at all.
What can you say about this poem?
That it's the only way to deny power over you. And he's so right.
I
Mhm.
felt like it was very present moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about answers, is it? It is about instruction, however.
Well, you know, it's kind of like at the end of the longer version of the Gospel of Mark. Well, you'll know you're a believer if you speak in tongues or you handle snakes or something like that. Here's another list.
Yeah.
And you know, and to me, practice resurrection is that's the main thing to do. And all these
Yes.
things are ways of going about doing that, but it's not a complete list. You know, if you want to have a slavish check, if you want to live by a checklist, well, this is not a bad one, but don't expect this to be all the answers by any means. So Wendell Berry asks us to be countercultural, to use our brains, to not, as Dorian says, to not let those in power get too close, to have any more power than necessary. And to me, you know, the notion of practicing resurrection is something I'm with Wendell Berry. I think it's something that that's the way I would call what I would try to do when I'm trying to be a disciple of Jesus. Is living into that resurrection, to be part of the kingdom of God or the commonwealth or the family of God. And this is the way to do it. And this is a good list. I mean, you know, there's some lines in here that I just absolutely adore.
It makes me think of Puddleglum, the marshwiggle in The Silver Chair. He says, they say there is no Narnia, but I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there is no Narnia. So even when we're in a period of doubting, whatever, we can live as like a Christian as we can, as much as we know of the gospel and so on, we can live into that. Puddleglum has been a very important person in my spiritual development.
I can see why.
And this really is a recommend to find what you do believe in and spend time there. Right? So, you know, Joe's list might be take Willie for a walk.
It absolutely is. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I really like praise ignorance for what man has not encountered, he has not destroyed.
That's a pretty sad comment, but yes.
But I think
agree.
it's very true.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about it in quite that way.
Yeah. Yep. For just a little bit above that, in the state of Florida, and I hope you not follow Florida politics, but if you did, you would be very much saddened. And so denounce the government and embrace the flag. Hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. That's a very, Claudia, I don't know what you think about that, but that's a very real truism for me. I mean, it's, you know, and for a lot of people, you know, in Florida and in America.
Yes.
Canada is somewhat more sensible, I think, but maybe not. Maybe I just don't know as much. So
We're starting an election season, so you know,
that's
wait
too bad.
till that's done.
I think
But it might be the institution too. All these elections for bishops, and I got a phone call from somebody today who's just you know, beside themselves in the Diocese of Florida. So it's kind of, you can maybe keep your faith in Jesus, but don't spend too much of it on the institution.
Yeah.
I think for Canadians, the phrase "that republic for which it stands" is from the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, isn't it? I pledge allegiance to the flag and
Yes.
to the republic for which it stands.
Yes.
Well, that would
Yeah,
be an
that's-
echo in the minds of American readers.
yeah. Hmm.
My children went to an American nursery school.
Yeah, they would know exactly where that came from. That's right.
Well, some of those convoy people were wanting their First Amendment rights, so.
In
Even though they're
Canada,
Canadian.
y'all have a First
Yeah.
Amendment?
No,
No, but they didn't know it.
And they were carrying, Confederate flags, some of them, and so things are filtering up here, Joe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I'm
well,
just waiting for the election to be called fake, and
It almost certainly will happen. It is just the way the world is these days.
Yeah.
And so
Kind of
it bears reading Wendell Berry frequently, it seems. to me.
I hope you're going to send us this PowerPoint, please.
I will. Yeah, or I will get it to, well, Helen, would it be the best thing to do to send it to you? Because you got everybody's emails, or maybe Linda does. I mean, but yes, we'll make sure. Now, the other thing and we won't go through this because it's late. But the other poem that is not this one. This is not bad. This is not a bad. And that's not it either. It's the very first, go up 3. Go to the, no, I'm sorry. I'm telling you all wrong. So go to the Hopkins poem. Not that one. Go down 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, go to the 2, go past those 2 text ones. And the one after that. That's it.
Yeah, that's Gerard Manley.
So I don't know how many of you are fans of Gerard Manley Hopkins. Hopkins is very difficult. He's difficult because he makes up a lot of his own words to describe things that he's trying to describe. And sometimes you have to read a poem. Well, I would suggest, and Tricia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it would take 4 or 5 readings to just kind of get a sense of what this is even about. But I will just tell you, if I may, let me just read part of this to you. The first 16 verses or so are a spinoff of a reference to a Greek pre-Socratic philosopher named Heraclitus. And Heraclitus was actually the guy, I think, who said, you can't put your foot in the same river, you can't wade in the same river twice, because the river's changing and you're changing, all the time. In other words, everything is in flux, everything is changing. And so in the first 16 verses or so, what Hopkins is basically saying is this, there is all sorts of change going on in the sky and in the water and in the earth and in fire. And then he goes on and he talks about how men, or people, are the same kind of, it's the same kind of thing. They're all getting ready to die. And it starts about halfway down. It says the line that starts, "Man, how fast his fire dent," which is his human activity, "his mark on mind is gone. Both are in an unfathomable, all is in an enormous dark drowned." And this is the whole universe that's collapsing. "Oh, pity and indignation, man-shaped that shone sheer off. The several, a star, death blasts, blots black out, nor mark is any of him at all so stark, but vastness blurs and time beats level." In other words, if you read these first few verses, these first few lines, and kind of get the sense of it, you'll say, oh my God, everything is falling apart. Everything is collapsing. There is nothing that's going to redeem us. And then the poet says, enough. The resurrection. a heart's clarion, away grief's gasping, joyless days, dejection. Across my foundering deck shone a beacon, an eternal beam. Flesh fade and mortal trash fall to the residuary worm. World's wildfire leave but ash in a flash at a trumpet crash. I am all at once what Christ is, since he was what I am. And this jack, joke, poor potsherd, patch, matchwood, immortal diamond is immortal diamond. If you, I promise you, if you read that a few times, I think you'll say there is great hope, and our hope is in the resurrection. And we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus, but it's our resurrection as well. And what is our calling? To be an immortal diamond, to go forever. And the poet took great comfort in that. I'll leave you with that. It's a little past 8:30. So I appreciate your very kind attention to my complete dithering on the PowerPoint and so forth. I really appreciate all your comments, and I love being with you guys. So any
love
final comments?
Being with you.
Thank
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Great.
Linda,
Thank
anything else?
you.
Yeah. Thanks,
No,
Claudia.
just so glad everybody came, and we'll look forward to seeing you as often as you can. Next week, it's breakfast on the beach. If you want to do a little reading ahead of time, that's fine, but we'll read it then. It's John 21. And as always, I'm so glad that Joe would share this time with us and with all of you. It's good.
Ah,
Night.
my privilege.
Thank you.
Mm.
Night,
Okay.
everyone.